All right. So now for one of my sells. This is a player that I do like. I love a ton. But I feel like now is the window to try to get out from under him, where the value just isn't really there for me on a consistent basis. And that's George Kittle. George Kittle right now is still going as like the fourth tight end off the board, which I understand. This is a player that finished as tight end 3 overall last year, which is fantastic, right? You're like, oh, tight end 3. And if you got to the playoffs, like he was a monster in the playoffs. Now you're not necessarily your championship game, but leading up to that, weeks 15, 16, 25.3 points and 30 points. Those two weeks, which is monster. And that's where Kittle does, right? Kittle is always good for a couple games a year to get you over 20 points. Last year, he had 4 games of over 20 points. And that's how you end up as tight end number 3 overall, despite him missing 2 games last year. And that's a big thing with Kittle. Get a little bit older. He's missed multiple games over the last 4 years, right? Like he's played in games where, he played in 14 games last year. Then he played in like 8 games. And he played in like 14. So for Kittle, injury is an issue. But that's not even my biggest concern with Kittle right now. Outside, his age is the end of the world as he enters closer to 30 right there. How old is George Kittle exactly? Let me tell you. He is 29. That's what I thought. But with Kittle, he's a roller coaster, Garrett. Like,
yeah.
Yes, you get those monster games, but then you got to settle for games where like 7 points, 4.4, 7.7, then boom, 16, 21, then 12, then 3, 24, 5, 4, 6, 25, 30, 12. Like it's a roller coaster ride. And right now the value for Kittle is the 4th tight end off the board. He's still a monster name because he's still a really good player. And with Brock Purdy there, that's great too, because with Purdy, he was averaging about 15 points a game with Brock Purdy. But going in, my biggest concern here is all the weapons around him. And right now in Kyle Shanahan's offense, Christian McCaffrey's got into the full offseason with his team and be fully into this playbook. And he's a dynamic weapon, right? Like he should honestly be the focal point of any offense, Christian McCaffrey. But then you have Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel as well, which all these concern me, right? I don't know if we talked about this before. Deebo was my sell at wide receiver, right? And I was worried about the same thing, like all these balls that go around. And yes, George Kittle's going to win you a game, but like I honestly would rather have a consistent guy over a guy that's going to score me 20 points. And if George Kittle at the age of 30 is going to be the 4th tight end off the board, I would love to move him for like this year. Like, can I get Tyler Higbee and then Dalton Kincaid? Can I get Tyler Higbee or Darren Waller, like you said, and Sam Laporta, Luke Musgrave, a Greg Dulcich? Can I get way younger on guys that might offer that potential there? Even a guy like David Njoku, who has offered some potential, even though he probably won't see the target share that I want consistently. Can Cole Kmet be the guy who comes in and be the number 2 there to DJ Moore? I don't know, but I would love Greg Dulcich is a great tight end. I love Sam Laporta. I love Dalton Kincaid. I can't scream that enough. But I think this is the right time to get out for George Kittle while he still holds that value. Because then once he hits at age 30, going on 31, that's when they see an automatic dip just in the Dynasty world, just because of age alone. It doesn't really matter on his production. Travis Kelce's the only bulletproof player there. If I can move him and get younger while getting another rookie young tight end or another player on top and see that kind of value, I'd be pretty comfortable with that, because as a team that's going to the championship, I'd be so worried. Yeah, last year it all worked out, right? Like in the playoffs, like he was a monster in the playoffs for you and helped carry the load there. But the year before that in the playoffs, he scored you in week 15 points, but then 4, and then 6. You know what I mean? Like it just wasn't there. And that could be a death sentence to you in the playoffs. And that's the most important factor there. Like you don't want a guy that you're like, oh, I hope he scores 20 today or 25 that gives you 4. Like that worries me. Now you're in the same tier as everybody else at tight end. So if I can move Kittle today and get younger with the guy that offers that same potential, big play potential, like I feel really good about that. And that's from somebody, I have a ton of George Kittle shares. I really do. I've been a big fan for a long time. If you listen to this podcast when George Kittle was a rookie, we talked him up and said, go out there when he's starting to break out. Like, you need to go out and trade for George Kittle. It's probably one of our bigger hits over the last 10 years. So for me to say now to finally sell George Kittle, it hurts me a little bit. But I'm trying to move in a lot of leagues, and I'm trying to get really good value back, and it's not the easiest thing to do. So that's only going to get worse. And that's what I'm seeing right now, where it's I already see the ice starting to melt on top of the mountain, and this avalanche is coming. So I feel now is the time, Garrett. Now is the time.
It is unfortunate, but you're right. One of the things I hate most out of the tight end position, especially if it's a guy that's considered a top tier guy, I paid quite a bit to acquire him on my team, or, I drafted him fairly high, is to go into weeks and just get absolute duds. So for example, a player that is almost identical in ADP, they're literally 2 spots overall in ADP different, is him and Dallas Goedert. So while George Kittle put up these 6, 4, 7, 3, 5, like all of these games that were just crushing blows. Dallas Goedert only had 2 games all season under 9 points. Only 2. So when you know that at your tight end position, sure, he might not have as many weeks where he's getting you 25 points, but when he's consistently getting you 13, 11, 12, 17, like when he's consistently getting you those types of games, that week in and week out roughly what you're getting, and you can build the rest of your team around it. Nothing hurts more than somebody just cratering your week, and you're having to hope that somebody else puts up a 25 or 30 spot to make up for that player, because now that player is not an advantage anymore. They're just making up for the player that sucked. So you need another player on top of that to get the 25, the 30 points. So I'm with you on that. At this point, I talked about how close their ADP is. I would even be willing to give up like George Kittle and a second to get me Dallas.
Got it.
Yeah. Because you get
you're talking about a 2-point differential on the points per game. That's all you're really talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. And we get the age and the consistency on top of it. So that's the type of move that I'd look to do. Now, if you're trading away George Kittle, like the Dallas Goedert owner might not necessarily be looking to move Goddard since they're in a similar tier, but there are those guys you mentioned, the Darren Waller, that we talked about as a buy. There's some guys lower on the list that I'd be willing, or maybe I'm using this to try to even move up. Like, can I do George Kittle plus to get Mark Andrews or somebody like that? So
he worries me a little bit too. I would love to move him plus for TJ Hawkinson, get that youth,
sure.
get the player that's averaging, literally only 0.7 points less per game on a per game basis. But again, somebody who's way more consistent, for when it comes to points per game, where he only had a couple games under 9 points as well here for TJ Hawkinson. He had that dud in week 5, but he also got hurt a little bit there. So didn't play in week 6. So it doesn't really count. So outside of that, he's got a couple games that are down as well. Jordan Hudson would be upside, but I'm with you. Like, I'd rather just get a guy who can help me now, because like with George Kittle's age bracket, you're looking at a guy who's only going to help for the next 2, maybe 3 years, right, at the most.
Right.
If you're looking for players to help you, like now, we mentioned Tyler Higbee's the same age. He can help you now. If you have a little bit of patience, if he's healthy, a guy like Zach Ertz was averaging 13 points per game, and they got rid of DeAndre Hopkins. He might be somebody Zach Ertz is almost free because we don't know how he's going to be in that quarterback situation. He might be someone to come out that helps you that's older. Darren Waller, like you mentioned, like getting that and some youth on top is what you're going for, because you're looking for that next tight end to give you value. And this draft class being so loaded there, this is the year to kind of strike, to get a proven guy who's a little bit older now. If you can't do what you said, like get younger there, and then get the young guy with upside on top of that, because outside of those big games, you're not missing a ton, right? And those big games really do matter. I'm not saying that they don't. And George Kittle will still give you that, but you got to look for consistency. That's for every single player. Now, you don't want the guy that's going to go out there and, a lot of those, those games are a little bit fugazi, those finishes where you come out here and look at it and you're like, hey, he was wide receiver 18. But meanwhile, he had 6 games where he had, not 6, that's a lot, but he had those couple games where he had 26, 27 points. A Joe Mixon game where he scored 55 points. Those kind of games are like an extra fantasy week altogether that can really shoot you up the ranks. Definitely at the tight end position. So, love you, George Kittle, but hey, you've got to go.